Alright, hey everyone. So this is the oral history project instructions. And we're going to do this little video where I'm just going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. Of course, after you've watched the video and read the instructions, please feel free to reach out. You know, we're going to be talking about this about a month before it's due, and then we're going to have a workshop on it closer to the due date. But please, you know, don't wait until the last minute to pick a project and start working on it. You are going to need time to really put the work in, and hopefully you will find this fun. This is not, you know, the same as writing a paper. This is sort of doing history. You know, people have been collecting oral histories from folks for a long time now, hundreds of years, in fact. Yep, maybe even thousands of years. Yeah, long time. So the ones we have recorded, though, are only, you know, within the last 100 years or so. The WPA during the New Deal started doing a bunch of oral history interviews with former slaves, in fact, and those, you can actually check them out. They're super, super interesting. So this is our oral history analysis project. So let's talk about that. So you're going to be able to historically contextualize contemporary issues, examine meaningful events and traditions, invite diverse perspectives, and share your work with classmates. So, an oral history interview encourages connection of students with family and community members and connection of students with one another. Oral history promotes a recognition of global, interconnected, and multifaceted impacts of late 20th and early 21st century events. You will also examine through critical analysis the advantages and disadvantages of consulting oral histories and historical memory. So some sample historical events that you might be able to interview people about: the Cold War, civil rights movements and New Left activism, the dot-com bubble and the crash, the 9/11 terrorist attack and the war on terror. These are all things that, you know, might be topics of discussion depending on who you interview. So, your assignment is to interview someone who is approximately 50 years or older. So they need to be born around 1790. That is not going to work. 1970 or earlier. You know, if you have a grandparent who was born in the 1950s and you want to interview them, that's totally fine. If you have a cousin who was born in 1996, that's not going to work. So it needs to be 1970 or earlier. My grandparents were both born in 1930, so they would have very interesting things to say. I'm sure, about a lot of stuff. They'd be able to talk about things earlier. You know, so think about that, and think about kind of what event maybe you want to ask someone about, or what time period you want to ask someone about. And, you know, it's someone in your family or someone in your community, and you please do not go to someone's house. Right now, this is something you can do over the phone. If the person you're interviewing has some sort of technical familiarity, you can do this via Zoom or Skype. If you have it through school, but if they have it, you can do it through Skype, you can do it through House Party, you can do it through any of those apps, and then you can interview them virtually. So please do not feel like you have to go to somebody's house. I am not asking you to go to someone's house or have someone come to your house. So you're going to interview them about experiences and memories of relatively recent historical events, or one specific event, depending on the way the interview goes. You'll have the same basic interview questions, which are below, plus additional student-created questions. So I want you to create a couple of your own as well. So it says informal. You need to be professional and ask complete, non-leading questions. And I have some examples of that. I'll get into that. But you do not have to be formal in your conversation's entirety. You know, if you're talking to your grandfather, you don't have to be like, "Sir, do you recall?" Like, you can be like, "So, Grandpa," or you know, things like that. So you need to do this. This is an academic assignment, so you do need to keep that in mind. But you don't have to, you know, dress up super fancy and depending on who you're interviewing, and do all that. So you'll develop around 10 questions and conduct your interview. Your questions should be based on the history, society, and culture of America during the lifetime of the person you are interviewing. So your questions should gauge what events they witnessed, how America has changed in their lifetime, what their personal experiences with key moments in history during their lifetime have been like. So these are, you can turn this section into like 4 or 5 questions right there. Bam. You know. So what were some of the major events you witnessed during your lifetime? How has America changed during your lifetime? What was your personal experience with X? You know, if this person was born in 1950, you may ask them, you know, what was your personal experience with the assassination of Dr. King in 1968? You know, or what was your personal experience during the Watergate scandal? Or, you know, just anything like that, you can kind of put that in there and see. And you can even ask them, is there a particular event from your lifetime that you remember very solidly and would like to focus on? And then you can ask them questions about that. So I've got some sample questions based on the information we just went over. So were there any major changes after the Cold War ended? Or was the tension from the war still present in your country? Now this is something if you were interviewing someone from like Uzbekistan or, well, that wasn't. Anyway, so that would work. Or you would just say, you know, were there any major changes after the Cold War ended? Or, you know, was the tension from the war still present here in the United States? Did you take part in the New Left activism of the 1960s? If so, what part did you play? And what do you remember about your experience? So don't ask, you know, do you remember this happening this particular way? That's a leading question. You don't want them to feel compelled to say yes or no to any of your questions. So keep them neutral in wording. So like, you know, if so, what part did you play and what do you remember about the experience? That's a very neutral question. It's not, do you remember X? It's, what do you remember about that experience? You know, so did you take part? It's not, you know, during the New Left activism, you know, what part did you play in it? First you're asking, did they take part in it, period. So New Left activism, you know, a lot of people think that's really interesting and really, really cool. So your interviewee may feel that they are compelled to say, yes, they did, because, you know, from whatever the structure of your question or your tone makes it seem like it's something you want to talk about. Don't do that. Keep your questions super duper neutral. I'll give you an example. Remember when I talked about the WPA interviewing former slaves? Well, a former slave woman was interviewed twice. The first time she was interviewed, she said that her slave experience was great, that her master treated her really well, and that everything was totally fine. The second time she was interviewed, she told the truth. She said that it was horrible, you know, the master beat them, and, you know, enslavement was terrible. What might have been the difference between those two experiences? Well, in the first one, the interviewer was white. In the second one, the interviewer was black. Now, you can't do anything about, you know, no one's asking you to change your appearance or who you are as a person, but just keep in mind that going into this interview, the person that you're interviewing is going to have preconceived notions about you just simply because of what your background and what you're talking about and, you know, the fact that you're interviewing them. So that is why it's really, really important to keep your questions as neutral as possible so you can get the best answers possible. So after you've conducted your interview, you're going to compile your transcript. So you will want to record this. You know, a lot of phones have recording apps where you can do voice recording. If you're using Skype or Zoom, you can record that as well. So, you know, record it or just take notes. You know, if you've got it on your computer, maybe have something up where you're typing notes at the same time. But you need a transcript. So you'll identify your subject by initials only and include their age. So for your presentation, because you are going to present this to the class, you're going to provide the questions and answers for at least 5 out of your 10 questions. When you submit your presentation, you'll include the entire transcript. So when you turn it in the week before presentations, when it's due, you'll give me the entire transcript and, you know, all that good stuff. But then when you present, you'll present on part of it. So as you create your presentation, be sure to point out any gaps between history and memory. Was there something your subject said that does not align with our historical knowledge? For example, historical memory describes Gold Rush, California as a place of infinite opportunity for all. In reality, it was a place where white miners enslaved, killed, legally killed, because there was no law against it, or displaced Native American miners. Asian and African American miners were also evicted from their plots, or often violently or under threat of violence by like vigilante gangs. So the historical facts directly confront popular memory. So think about that as an example. You will also want to point out any particularly interesting responses from your interviewee in your presentation. Was there anything that jumped out at you during the interview? Did you gain a new appreciation for the time period through which they lived? So conclude your presentation by answering the following question in your own opinion based on your experience with this project. What are the advantages and disadvantages of consulting oral histories and historical memory? Your presentation will be about 5 to 7 minutes. Classmates will provide feedback on your interview and presentation. So for feedback, classmates need to think about what the structure of the interview questions were, like what they think about the structure of the questions, and how this person's answers add or detract from historical understanding of the period. Because it's possible that someone's memory is completely antithetical to what we know about what happened. That just happens sometimes, so that can be a disadvantage of oral histories, but they also can give us huge advantages. Also, that historical memory that is faulty can tell us a lot as well. So there's value in all of it, but some of it doesn't help historical understanding necessarily. So you'll want to think about that. So those are the instructions for the oral history project. We will talk about this in class multiple times, and so if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm very excited for those of you who picked this one. I'm really excited to see what you do, and like I said, please feel free to get up with me if you have any questions at all.